معاكو هلا أدنى معاكو هلا
مدحويني وحن كيمي
Somali Djibouti baad ka timi
gacanta la irtireeg baa la iga qabtay dadka iyaguna wiila wada qaba raaf baa habeenaya maalin la nagu gura
waa nasiib weeyaan waa nasiib weeyaan laakiin waxaanu qaban karno waanu qaban
Soomaalidu waa shan gamcood oo laba guushi haleeshay saddexna haysta gumaysiin bagoono wata waxaan gobolka Faransiisku gumaysto waagi la goodaba iyagoo waxba geysan kara baduub iyo raafiyo gowdaas uun ku hayay idinkaan noo gacalay ma noo soo gurmataan gobolada xoroobayo noo soo gurmada
adna xagee ka timi adna meel maad ka timi
waxaan ka yimi Somali NFD ha
haye
kunooma noola
wala hawla wala quwwata illa billah aliyul azim
noole ma jirto labadii lugood waaniga dawaadiga arka dadka kalena iga sii diran wax dhintiyo wax ayda lagu gowracayba
karaankayaga waanu ku qaban doonaa
idinka mooyana cid kale ma lihiin
1969, Siad Barre established himself as the new military leader of Somalia. He gained his popularity by the vision of uniting all Somali-speaking tribes under one flag. The first step of this vision was to annex the part of Ethiopia inhabited by ethnic Somalis to the Somali Republic. After he was defeated in that war against Ethiopia in 1978, his glorious days of popularity were over. Because he had neglected the northern part of Somalia, the ex-British protectorate, he didn't have the support of those people anymore. Especially oppressed was the main tribe in the north, the Isaaq, and therefore they didn't want him anymore. But he wanted to stay in power. In order to do this, he needed the support of his own tribe, the Darod tribe. The majority of the Darod lives in Ethiopia, and as he had lost their territory in the war, he wanted them to come to live in Somalia, especially in the north. The world believed these people to be political and drought refugees, but the truth was different. In fact, most of these people didn't come for those reasons, but were victims of a political game played by the Somali dictator. He bribed many tribal leaders by giving them houses, cars, money and many other things. He invited them to live in Mogadishu and Hargeisa on the condition that they tell their people to come over to Somalia. These tribal leaders and chiefs then fulfilled this by promising their subjects houses, food and a good life. In combination with food aid, which was distributed at the border, this method seemed to work very well. Soon Barre's refugees had taken over the power in government and the army in the north, and started to grossly abuse it. Most of these so-called refugees were settled in camps and provided for by United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and many other aid organizations. From the beginning, most of the men were forcibly recruited into a branch of the Somali army, the West Somalian Liberation Front, and later directly into the Somali army. The refugees and the dictator's followers were given powers to mistreat the indigenous people and to do with them whatever they wanted. The local people resisted and were oppressed still further, until a bloody war broke out. The main cities of the north were attacked by the Somali National Movement, the opposition forces, in order to liberate their people from the oppressive powers. After heavy battles, the Somali National Movement was driven out of cities like Hargeisa, Burao, Erigabo, Arabsio. Those, as well as other cities, were destroyed during those battles, mainly by air bombardment and heavy artillery by the troops of the dictator, causing, of course, heavy casualties among the civilian population. They fled for their lives over the border into Ethiopia or into the countryside.
The international media did not show up en masse for the slaughter of the Isaaqs. Barry's atrocities were largely ignored, but Isaaq artists captured their plight. All-out civil war eventually erupted in 1988, when a mainly Isaaq resistance group called the Somali National Movement, the SNM, briefly seized Hargeisa and other towns. Barry ordered Soviet MiG jets and American-built tanks to level the cities. But it wasn't enough to save his regime. In January of last year, Barry fled to Kenya. His bodyguards gunned down and left to rot outside the presidential palace. In the north, the Isaaqs inherited a dying land. In Hargeisa, once home to 500,000 people, 50,000 were killed.
Somaliland first became separate in the 19th century when the colonial powers carved up the Somali-speaking lands of the Horn. The southern shores of the Gulf of Aden fell to Britain, which held them until Hargeisa and Mogadishu united to form an independent Somalia in 1960. 5 years ago, Somaliland reasserted its independence, devastated by a genocidal civil war. Today, much of Hargeisa still looks like this, pulverized by Mogadishu's tanks and planes. Tens of thousands died in a decade of war. Hundreds of thousands fled towards Ethiopia. Hargeisa, unlike Mogadishu, is peaceful today, but desperately poor. Not a single country recognizes Somaliland, and the aid money that has rained down upon southern Somalia has been conspicuous by its absence here. There is no relief for the poor. In their frustration, almost all the men chew.
Your basic message to the international community is to recognize Somaliland and recognize that you want no part of Somalia, to the anarchy there.
Anybody who wants to help the Somali people must start with recognizing Somaliland, and then with the advice, and the guidance of the government of Somaliland, we can then together find a solution for the problems of the South.
mar Allah u naxariistay marxuumka iyo wafdi uu hogaaminaya ay socdaal ku tageen wadamo fara badan oo caalamka kamida oo Mareykanku uu ku jiray oo fursad uu u helay telefishinka CNN-ta in uu uga waramo si caalamka meel fara badan hadalkiisu u gaadho qadiyada dhabta ah ee Somaliland iyo sida ay gaarka uga tahay dalka Soomaaliya.